The sound of rain persists, now heavier than before, pounding against windows and rooftops. Thunder rumbles faintly in the distance, adding to the dark, tense atmosphere. A low, suspenseful melody plays in the background. Detective Ethan Graves had come closer to the truth than anyone ever had. Kincaid, Mr. H's enforcer, had slipped through his grasp once again, but Graves wasn't backing down. The game was more dangerous now, the stakes higher, and every step he took brought him closer to the edge. The sound of a phone ringing cuts through the storm. Graves answers quickly, his voice implied through the narrator. Graves' apartment, night. Rain beats against the windows as the phone call continues. Graves is pacing, his footsteps slow but deliberate as he listens to the voice on the other end. The call was from Charlie, another lead on Kincaid, but this time it was different. Kincaid had been spotted meeting with someone important, someone Graves hadn't expected, Harrison. The two men had been seen together in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. Graves grabs his coat, the sound of the fabric rustling, the door creaking open as he leaves. Graves felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. Harrison had claimed to want Kincaid stopped, but now it was clear Harrison wasn't just another pawn. He was part of the game, and it was time to confront him. The door clicks shut, and the sound of rain grows louder as Graves steps outside. Abandoned building, midnight. The rain pours heavily on the roof of the building, dripping through cracks in the ceiling. Graves' footsteps echo in the empty space as he moves cautiously through the building. The wind howls faintly outside, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The abandoned building was falling apart, cracked walls, broken windows, and an eerie silence that hung in the air like a ghost. Graves moved through the darkness, his senses heightened, knowing that Kincaid and Harrison could be waiting for him. Every shadow felt alive, every sound amplified by the tension. Graves slows his pace, the sound of quiet voices up ahead. He pauses, listening closely. Graves heard them before he saw them, Kincaid and Harrison, their voices low, discussing something that chilled Graves to the core. They were planning something big. A final move that would tie up all the loose ends. The sound of quiet conversation drifts through the air, though the words are muffled and indistinct. Graves moves closer, his breathing steady but tense. Graves edged closer, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. But then, just as he was about to get a clear view, a floorboard creaked beneath his foot. The conversation stopped abruptly, and for a moment, everything was silent. Too silent. The sound of guns being drawn echoes sharply in the empty building. Graves freezes. Kincaid's voice cut through the silence. "You should have stayed away, Graves," he said. "Now you've walked right into the lion's den." The sound of footsteps approaching quickly. Graves draws his gun, stepping out from the shadows. Graves stepped into the open, gun raised, eyes locked on Kincaid and Harrison. But Kincaid just smiled, his cold eyes gleaming with amusement. "You're in over your head, Detective," Kincaid said. "You don't know how deep this goes." Graves remains silent, but the tension in the air is thick. The wind whistles through the broken windows, and the rain pounds against the building. For a moment, everything was still. Graves knew he was outnumbered, outgunned. But he also knew he was so close to unraveling the truth. And he wasn't going to let Kincaid and Harrison walk away. Not this time. The sound of heavy footsteps as Kincaid moves forward, his presence menacing. Just as Kincaid stepped toward him, a loud crash echoed through the building. The ceiling above them groaned under the weight of the rain and wind, and debris began to fall around them. Kincaid and Harrison scrambled, caught off guard by the sudden chaos. The sound of debris crashing to the floor, the groaning of the building under strain. Graves moves quickly, taking advantage of the moment. Graves saw his chance. He moved fast, grabbing a metal pipe from the ground and knocking Cade's gun out of his hand. The two men collided, struggling for control as the building creaked and shifted around them. The sound of a fierce struggle grappling, grunts, and the clash of metal on metal. Graves and Kincaid fight for control. Kincaid was strong, but Graves had the upper hand. He slammed Kincaid against the wall, pinning him down just as Harrison tried to make his escape. The sound of footsteps running, distant as Harrison makes a break for it. Graves hesitates for a moment, breathing heavily. Graves knew he couldn't let Harrison go. He had to make a choice chase after the man who could lead him to Mr. H or deal with Kincaid once and for all. Graves breathes heavily, his decision hanging in the air for a moment. In the end, the choice was clear. Graves handcuffed Kincaid, securing him to a metal beam, and ran after Harrison. But the building was crumbling fast, and the rain only made it worse. By the time Graves reached the exit, Harrison was gone, vanished into the night. The sound of heavy breathing, Graves standing in the rain just outside the building. The wind howls and the building creaks ominously behind him. Graves stood in the rain, his heart pounding, frustration burning inside him. Harrison had slipped away, but Kincaid was finally in custody. The enforcer's game was over, but the man pulling the strings was still out there, still waiting in the shadows. The sound of distant sirens approaching as Graves pulls himself together and steps back inside to confront Kincaid. Interrogation room, morning. The quiet hum of the police station fills the air, faint voices in the background. The rain has slowed to a drizzle outside. Graves sits across from Kincaid in a cold, sterile interrogation room. A low buzz of a flickering light overhead adds to the tension. Kincaid sat across from Graves, his hands cuffed to the table, his expression calm and unreadable. Despite being caught, there was no fear in his eyes, only the cold, calculating look of a man who had been playing this game for far too long. A moment of silence as Graves stares at Kincaid, waiting for him to speak. Graves didn't need to ask the questions, he already knew the answers. Kincaid had been following orders for years, cleaning up the messes Mr. H left behind. But now, Kincaid had gone rogue, making his own moves, taking matters into his own hands. It was a dangerous game, and Kincaid had lost. The sound of Kincaid shifting in his seat, his voice implied through the narrator. "You think you've won?" Kincaid asked, his voice low and mocking. "You're just a pawn, Graves. Mr. H is still out there, and he's already making his next move." Graves remains silent, but the tension between them grows. Graves leaned in, his eyes locked on Kincaid's. "Tell me where to find him," Graves demanded, his voice steady. But Kincaid only smiled, a cold, twisted smile that sent a chill through the room. "You'll never find him," Kincaid said, "but he'll find you. And when he does, you won't even see it coming." The sound of the chair scraping as Graves stands up, the tension thick as he steps away from the table. Kincaid's words hung in the air, a warning that echoed through Graves' mind. The game wasn't over, not yet. And Mr. H was still out there, waiting for his moment. The door creaks open as Graves leaves the interrogation room, the sound of rain faintly returning in the background. Rooftop, night. The rain has stopped, but the wind still howls softly across the rooftop. Graves stands alone, looking out over the city, his mind racing with everything he's learned. Graves stood on the rooftop, the city stretching out before him, a maze of lights and shadows. He had come so close capturing Kincaid, unraveling part of the mystery, but Mr. H was still a ghost, slipping through his fingers. The man behind it all was still out there, watching, waiting for Graves to make his next move. A long pause as Graves breathes deeply, the wind howling around him. But Graves wasn't giving up. He had come too far, risked too much. He knew that finding Mr. H would be his toughest challenge yet, but he was ready. No matter the cost, he would bring the man behind the shadows to justice. The sound of a car engine revving in the distance, the wind growing softer as the scene fades out. The familiar sound of typing returns, rhythmic and deliberate. A phone rings faintly in the background. In a darkened room, far from the city lights, the game continued. Fingers tapped against a keyboard, messages sent, orders given. Kincaid is gone, the message read. But Graves is still in play. Prepare for the final move. The sound of typing stops abruptly, and the faint sound of rain resumes. Graves had taken down one of Mr. H's most dangerous enforcers, but the fight was far from over. The shadows were closing in, and the man behind it all was making his final move. But Graves wasn't done yet. He was ready for whatever came next. Next time, on Silent Shadows.